All right, welcome to the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast. I'm Corey Shapiro. I'm a divorce attorney in New York City, and I help people become more creative, less reactive in their divorce. And I'm always looking out for smarter people than me. And I found one, and I have them on my show. I met Dr. Jeremy Gaies, who's a mental health professional down in Florida. Yeah, I'm in New York right now, and he's in Florida, and it's December, so he's already doing something better than me. So I want to welcome you to the show, Dr. Gaies.
Thank you so much for having me, Corey. It's a pleasure to chat with you.
Now, I met Dr. Gaies. He gave a training in collaborative divorce, and don't worry, we're going to learn all about that, and I think this is a great idea for people who are going to go through a divorce. This was my second training, and I actually learned about the training from Dr. Randy Heller, who I think you do know, Dr. Gaies. And I was like, a Florida training? I'm a New York attorney. I have to tell you, it was really special. It was with his colleagues, Adam Cordover, who's an attorney down there, and a financial professional, David Harper. You know, I think the most important thing about a divorce is, if you're going to do it right, and the way you do it is try to be more peaceful, moving out of conflict, is having these mental health professionals, or what you call facilitators or coaches. And I just think it's so amazing. So aside from his great work he does in his own practice, he also is an author. He co-authored a book, which is so useful, Mindful Co-Parenting. You can check that out on Amazon. In his more recent book, he wrote a whole book on a clear and concise guide to collaborative divorce, which is easy to read and, again, really useful. So tell me what drew you, first of all, to being, you know, in this divorce peacemaking, coming from, I believe, as a therapist.
Corey, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm just thrilled to be here with you and thrilled to get a chance to chat with all of your listeners. So it's actually kind of an interesting story. Back in 2009, I was a psychologist doing all the things psychologists do, mostly therapy, though, counseling and therapy. And I got a phone call from an attorney who said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing something called parenting coordination?" I said, "I don't know what that is." She said, "Well, it's working through the court with people in really high conflict and divorce." And I said, "Oh, no, that doesn't sound like what I want to do. Thank you anyway." And that was the end of the call. A short time later, I was referred a family for parenting coordination. And I said, "Okay, let's see how this goes." And I loved it. I think I'm a little bit like the moth to the light in terms of being drawn to situations where there's a lot of chaos and conflict and an opportunity to bring some peace and calm and order to it. So I started doing parenting coordination, and I ended up loving it so much and finding I kind of had a knack for it, that I continued to do that for a number of years. In the meantime, I heard about this thing called collaborative divorce, which seems like it took in a lot of the different skill sets that I had, because I'd still be working with couples, helping them through the divorce process, helping on the co-parenting matters, which is what parenting coordination did, and dealing with the conflicts that came up, but also getting a chance to work directly with attorneys and financial professionals. So I did a training, much like you did. I did a training back in 2010, and I became a collaborative professional. And I did both activities for many years until I decided that the collaborative world is really where I wanted to be devoted. I stopped doing parenting coordination, and now I am a full-time collaborative practitioner.
That's wonderful. I think I'm the same way in the sense where I feel like fully engaged when there's people having that conflict, and I feel like I could really help them through that maze. And when things are just normal, maybe I'm not I'm not at my best. And my wife, thankfully, is opposite. See, she's great when it's normal, and with conflict, she melts. So there you go.
So you complement each other.
Yeah, we complement each other. So let's talk about your two books. Let's first talk about the Mindful, because I think that was your first book, at least for the general audience.
Yeah, and actually,
you have it there,
copy, if I can show it here. It's called Mindful Co-Parenting, and you see it was co-written with a dear friend, Dr. Jim Morris, who has unfortunately passed away in the interim. But he and I were both parenting coordinators, and we sat down together and said, you know, we wish we had a good resource that we could give to families who are struggling on these co-parenting issues that would really be like our voices. And we couldn't find a book out there, so we wrote one together. And that's what this book is about. It's for parents who are thinking about divorce, who are entering a divorce process, any divorce process. And it talks about the impact on the children. It talks about how to develop a parenting plan. It talks about how to be mindful in your co-parenting relationship, and even what to do after, for example, when new relationships come into play. And that book has been very helpful to a lot of people. I give it out to every family with children that sees me for any divorce matter.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it had such good information. You know, one thing is you Google this stuff and you don't know how reliable it is. I'm telling you, as a divorce attorney over 20 years, I read that book and he's cutting through a lot of things that you have to think about, and it will save you a lot of time and money and aggravation. So full recommendation for that book. Let's talk about your newer book. Yeah, of course. Sure. Let's talk about your newer book, The Clear and Easy Guide to Collaborative Divorce.
Yeah, here's a copy. You see, it's got the palm trees and the ocean because I'm a Florida guy. And it also kind of evokes what we're looking for people to experience, which is a certain kind of peace and tranquility in their divorce. But this book was written because I had been a collaborative professional for many years. And, you know, different professionals would hand out a different information sheet or article or something like that, a brochure, to prospective clients or to spouses who were newly in the collaborative process. But none of it seemed to really capture all the questions that people had, all the anxieties they had about the process, in trying to figure out if it's the right process for them or not, and figuring out how to navigate the process. So I sat down and wrote a book that's really just a glorified, frequently asked questions format. So each page is a question that people typically ask, and then there's a concise answer to that. And so I like to give this out to anyone who's thinking about a collaborative process so they can consider whether it's the right match for them. And then for folks who are newly in the process, I like for them to read it so that their apprehensions are calmed earlier on. They see that this is a methodology that's really kinder, more gentle, more supportive, but also efficient and private and practical.
Yeah, I mean, I know you told us all to read it, which I did. I bought it during the training, and it felt like, you know, I was given the keys a little bit, or the map, if you will, to this process. Because, you know, the first time you're hearing about it, there's a lot of unknowns, and coupled with that, you know, I'm a professional learning about it, but if I had to go through a divorce and with my family on the line or my children on the line, it's just so nice to have a resource that is trustworthy, informative, and useful. Also, I mean, it's a quick read. It's a great, I love books that just give you it. Yeah, it just gives you it. No, he's not a story. It's just like gives you the information. You can move on with your life. So that's great.
Corey,
so let's talk about.
So I like to keep things in simple terms, right?
Yeah, I don't know if that's true, but but I am too. Okay, so let's talk about, for listeners who are like, okay, I hear what you're talking about, collaborative divorce. You know, how is that different from just a traditional divorce? Because to me, you know, we just say I'm getting a divorce. We don't say I'm getting a collaborative divorce. We don't say we're getting a traditional divorce. We're just saying I'm getting divorced. So how do we get people who are unfamiliar with this concept to think about it strongly as an idea for their divorce?
Okay, fantastic question. This really gets to the heart of it. So when people go through what we call a traditional divorce, we're really talking about litigation, right? We're talking about, in essence, each spouse suing the other in court. That's what litigation is. Now, it might not necessarily go to a judge ultimately. Maybe the attorneys can work it out. If you have two attorneys who work really nicely together, that could work out nicely, but you don't always have that. And so that's traditional divorce. It happens through the court on the court schedule, which can take a very long time. A lot of information ends up in the public record, so it's not very private. And there's a tendency for people not to sit down together and work out solutions. Instead, one spouse is here with their attorney, the other spouse is here with their attorney. Sometimes the attorneys communicate, sometimes the spouses communicate. And what ultimately happens is there's a lot of contention, misperceptions, misunderstanding, wasted time. If you wanted a piece of financial information or a document, you have to file something. You have to wait for the other side, because there are two sides in an adversarial process to decide if they're going to give you the information or maybe they're hiding information. All of that goes away in a collaborative process. So a collaborative process is a way to help families through their divorce in as peaceful and efficient a manner as possible, uninvolved with the court. It's not on the court schedule. It's on the schedule of the spouses, with the goal of reaching resolutions on everything. So getting to agreements that are durable and satisfying and solid, not so that one person wins, the other one loses, but that both people win and the children win and the whole extended family can win, because the couple gets to a resolution that's custom made for them, it's fit for them, and it's designed by them. There's no judge telling you what to do. It's the couple themselves that are coming up with a solution with the help and support of the professionals that they brought into the process.
Yeah, I think you're summarizing it a lot, but what I'm thinking of when I'm hearing all this is I'm thinking, does the other side have to be peaceful? Does the other side have to be agreeable? What happens if I'm stressed? What happens if I have a difficult spouse? What happens if I'm panicky? Is this process for me? Or am I just going to get pushed over by the other spouse? And do I have to go to court to really just get justice?
Excellent question. And that is a question that people often do raise when they're considering this process. So the good news is that this process can accommodate and absorb and contain all of those kinds of conflicts and concerns. The one thing, though, that must be present is you must have two spouses who want to reach a resolution outside of the court. So if your spouse wants to go to court, don't pursue a collaborative process, because they're going to sabotage it and they're ultimately going to get to court. But if both spouses want to get to court, we can accommodate spouses with personality disorders or with high conflict styles. We can accommodate spouses who are angry or who are sad, who are hurt, or who are scared. We can deal with all kinds of challenging situations, difficult financial matters, shared family businesses, bankruptcies, complicated stock options. We can do all of that kind of work, and we can do it in a way that helps get to a resolution without one spouse being able to intimidate or use their power over the other spouse, because that's a big issue in court, right? You can litigate and you can say, well, I'll fight my spouse because I'm going to hire Corey and he's the best attorney in the New York metropolitan area, right? Well, that sounds great, but you can't control what the other spouse is going to do, what that other attorney is going to do, what the judge is going to do, and what the court system as a whole is going to do. So yes, you can kind of stand up and fight, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get the satisfaction you want. In a collaborative process, you will get the satisfaction because the only resolution that ultimately is going to work is one that meets the needs of both spouses and presumably their children as well.
That's nice to hear. So this is not the process where the parties or couple are on their best behavior. They're just going to have a normal experience and they can have a difficult divorce.
Yeah. Can I jump in on that?
Tell me more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me more.
So I would say yes and no. This process can accommodate folks who are contentious as long as they both want to resolve the issues out of court. But the collaborative process by its nature is very supportive and calming, because you don't have a group of people who are fighting against each other. You have professionals who, as a team, are going to be helping the couple come up with options that work for both of them. And so when the spouses realize that, hey, listen, we're not here to beat each other up, we're here to resolve the problems, the temperature in the room goes down dramatically. And when people have an opportunity to have their say, to be heard and to be understood, the temperature in the room goes down dramatically. And when there's a structure, a system that guarantees that all of these issues are going to be addressed thoroughly and competently, the temperature in the room goes down. So yes, you might still have moments where there's tension and conflict, but we can manage that in the process. And the process itself tends to mitigate all of that. So yes, a collaborative divorce can have some points of contention, but a collaborative divorce looks nothing like a litigated divorce otherwise, because everyone gets it that we're all here together to help you. We're not here to help you beat each other up.
Right. You're trying to find a workable solution. You're not trying to find a win for one party.
That's right. If it was a win for one party, that's not collaborative. Both spouses have to come out saying, I'm satisfied with this resolution and therefore I'm willing to sign it. If either spouse says, I don't like this isn't right, then we will be the first ones to say, then you shouldn't sign it. We have to work harder to find something that's going to work for both of you.
All right. This is wonderful. It sounds, and maybe some people listening to this maybe say it's aspirational. They're skeptical. Maybe it's unrealistic. How can you reframe this in a way that we can get the other side on board? Maybe they don't want to go to court, but maybe they are not, aware of this. And also, I'm not sure if the name collaborative divorce is the best name that we can come up with. Because I was just thinking it could be called like kid-friendly divorce or, save all your money divorce. I don't know. We could come up with something better. But how do we get people who are skeptical about this process to reframe it to get, the other side buy-in?
Okay. So first I want to talk about the aspirational part. This process really works. That doesn't mean every family who goes through it will succeed, but 9 out of 10 families do, which is a very good track record. So I can tell you from personal experience, this process really can work, but that doesn't mean it's easy. I mean, there's going to be a lot of work and it's still stressful, but it is a very successful methodology. But to your question, how do we help the other spouse who maybe isn't yet convinced? And I think it's about education. It's about educating the other spouse. It's about educating the spouse's attorney, because they may have hired an attorney who's not that familiar with the collaborative process. And incidentally, you're right about the term. Collaborative divorce is not the best word, I would say, because it's a little bit murky. And it really should be something like kid-friendly divorce or human-friendly divorce, because that's really the nature of it. It's just a logical, sane way to do this transitional process of divorce. So you and I will work on a new name for it to finish our conversation.
Right. Collaborative divorce 2, version 2.
That's right.
Okay. I know you have a lot of experience, you said, as a parenting coordinator with, children. And tell us about the difference of resolving these parenting issues in a collaborative process versus resolving these children issues in a traditional litigation process.
Oh, wow. I love that question, because that does get to the kind of heart of my interest, is trying to help find a peaceful path for children through divorce. So here's the real difference. When I worked as a parenting coordinator, and granted, those were not your average families. Those were families who had a level of conflict and contention that led the court to involve a parenting coordinator. But nonetheless, we do see a lot of conflict and a lot of divorces when it comes to children. The goal was to try to help them reach resolutions, reach agreements. But in that process, which is parenting coordination is usually part of a litigated process, there's all this other stuff going on around the spouses, around the parents, that's poking at them and pushing them to misperceive the other and to get angry and then to act out and to hold the children back or to talk to the children in a negative way about the other parent, all of which is terribly damaging. In the collaborative process, we wrap ourselves around this couple, around these co-parents, and we, right from the start, we talk to them about the importance of insulating the children, protecting the children, working together to reach an agreement, And we don't have all of those other factors. We don't have a court hearing coming up tomorrow that gets everybody worked out. We don't get a nasty letter from one attorney to the other that triggers a spouse and then gets them to misbehave. So the whole nature of the process, the whole atmosphere we create is one that's focused on what can we all do to help your children have the best path through this divorce.
Yeah, I love that. It feels so much more calming for the kids, so much less stressful. Jesus.
It is. It is.
Really wonderful. Now, why is it, this is just my perception, but why is it that not all attorneys, divorce attorneys, embrace this concept of collaborative divorce? Because at least in the New York area, which I'm more familiar with, the biggest firms, they basically do litigation. And there are firms that do collaborative divorce, but they're usually smaller and less of them. So why is it that the more attorneys don't just embrace this better concept? It's like a version 2 or 3 of divorce.
Absolutely. That's another great question. You should really be a podcaster because you have just terrific interview questions, Corey. So there are several answers to that question. The first answer is that it takes time for people to change. So there was a time many years ago when a new methodology came up called mediation. And it was a great idea. And it took a long time for mediation to take hold because it was something new and different. Nowadays, mediation is so universal that everybody's mediating left and right? But it took time for the legal community to make those kinds of shifts. It's the same thing with collaborative practice, I think, that while it's not new, it's been around since the early 1990s, there are still a lot of attorneys who hadn't heard of it. And there are a lot of jurisdictions where it's just not that common. So I think that's one factor. A second factor is that I think there are some misunderstandings about the collaborative process. Some of it maybe comes across in the name choice. People think, oh, well, that's fine for people who are really amicable, people who get along really nicely anyway. But if we're disagreeing, or if I have a spouse who's really a jerk, then this is not for us. And it couldn't be further from the truth. If you have a spouse who's a jerk, you want to be in a collaborative process because you have a whole team of professionals who are going to manage your spouse so that your spouse won't behave like such a jerk throughout your whole divorce process, right? Or if you have contention, this is the process for you because this is a process that can manage and absorb and contain all that contention. And we can also help teach you how to reduce it, even if you have a difficult spouse. So this is really the right process for you. But I think that's a second reason why people, both attorneys and spouses, misunderstand the collaborative process. And they think, well, maybe it's not right for us. And then the third reason is cost. So the collaborative process is a wonderful process, and it's generally very efficient, which is a good way to manage costs. But it's not free and it's not cheap. What we know is that in most cases, mediation and collaborative processes, both of which we've put in the category of alternative dispute resolution methods, are definitely much cheaper than litigation. The same family that goes through a collaborative process, no matter how much they spend, would likely have spent significantly more litigating because litigation tends to breed more conflict and it's also wildly inefficient in most jurisdictions. Okay.
Yep.
But nonetheless, there are upfront costs with the collaborative process because you have 4 professionals generally. You can do collaborative with just the attorneys. There is an attorney-only model. But the way it's generally practiced around the world, and especially in the United States, we do bring in allied professionals such as mental health professionals and financial professionals, and we form a team. And the model that I'm involved in, which is called the neutral coach model, does involve a mental health professional and then also a financial professional who's another neutral. So you do have to pay those 4 professionals. And so there are upfront costs. And again, it's not cheap. That becomes a barrier to some families who just simply don't have the means. So at this point in history, the families who go through collaborative processes do have at least some means. But it doesn't mean you have to be wealthy. And there are a variety of models. In fact, you and I were chatting about this before we started the interview. There are flat fee models that can help reduce the cost. In some jurisdictions, there are professionals who use a modest means rate. In other
Yeah.
words, we'll all reduce our rates so we can meet the needs of certain families. And in some jurisdictions, there are pro bono programs where we all provide our services at no cost. So there are ways for some families who don't have the means to use this process. But the best thing, if you're interested in a collaborative process and you're concerned about the cost, is to speak to your attorney about it and ask, what are some ways that we can use this excellent process, but in a way that fits within our resources?
Yeah, no, I like that. And I really love the idea of having a team of people who are all working together, professionals like you, who can help people who really have to get out of their own way sometimes. And it's hard to do. It's really hard to do. And I've represented mental health professionals, and it's hard for them to do when it's them. So they're just the same way, just like everyone else. They're human too. It's just very hard sometimes to get out of your way. Yeah, when you're activated and stressed and angry. All right. So before I ask you this question, I want to talk about just, maybe we should define it, but what's the difference between mediation and collaborative divorce? Because when I thought about it, it seems very similar, because in mediation, I mean, I know you can have a mediator and I know you can have the couple there, but you could have the attorneys there. So you could have the attorneys and the mediator. So what's difference of that than the collaborative process where you would have also an attorney and maybe a facilitator?
Sure. This is a very common question that spouses rightfully will ask. So both mediation and collaborative divorce fall in that alternative dispute resolution methodology, meaning we're looking for ways to reach resolution, to help the spouses come up with options and ideas, and to reach an outcome, a resolution that they both feel good about. We use a lot of the same tools. In other words, we use positive and hopeful language, and we do brainstorming, and we do option building, and we make sure that the spouses have self-determination, meaning that they understand they're the ones who get to call the shots and make the decisions. But there are some really significant differences that matter. I can speak about this because I am a certified family mediator in Florida, and I'm also a collaborative professional, so I know both sides of it. So mediation is a phenomenal process, but we need to understand that in general, mediation takes place within the context of litigation, meaning that the spouses typically go to a mediator when they filed for divorce, when the court's involved in some ways. The judge may say, okay, you have to go see a mediator to see if we can resolve it, but it's still in the context of mediation. And if there are attorneys representing those spouses, the attorneys have to be thinking about what happens if we do end up in court. So even though you're trying to resolve the issues in a mediation session, you're also having to think about the possibility of litigating. So attorneys have to almost have their brains in two different places at the same time. Mediation is also more of an event than a process. So what that means is that typically spouses go to a mediation session, maybe with their attorneys and with a mediator. But it's usually an event. They do it on a particular day for a certain block of hours, or they may devote the whole day to it and spend the whole day. And they may come back a second time, but it's usually kind of a point in time. Collaborative divorce is different in both of these important areas. First of all, it is an out-of-court resolution process. And it's a process where everyone involved agrees that if the spouses don't reach a resolution, those attorneys are disqualified from representing them in court. The good news about that is that 90% of the time we do reach a full resolution, and that because the attorneys don't have to have half their brain thinking about what do we do if we have to go to court, all of their energies, all of their focus is on how do we help these two people reach a resolution. So that's just huge. The second part of it is the collaborative process is truly a process that happens over time. It is not an event. So unlike mediation, where you might plan weeks ahead to come and sit with a mediator and boom, here we're going to do it. Maybe we're even assign the agreement that day. In the collaborative process, we know it's going to take some months. So people have time to process the information. They have time to process their emotions. They have time, parents, for example, have time to try out a time-sharing schedule to see if it works for their children, even before they ultimately agree to it and sign off on it. We have the opportunity to work with people, to establish relationships with them. So by the time they're ready to sign off on a full agreement, it is an agreement that they've really had a chance to think about, and it's a durable, solid, satisfying agreement. In mediation, sometimes what happens is people are so desperate just to get the darn thing signed today that they give away the farm, right? And they agree to things they didn't want to agree to. Or they're so tired at the end of a mediation session that they just make mistakes, or that they relinquish where they really shouldn't relinquish. And then they have regrets afterwards. And then sometimes they go to court to litigate because they have regrets. It's very uncommon for a resolution reached in a collaborative process to end up back in court, or to end up in court in the first place, because it's so thoughtfully and carefully produced over a period of time.
Nice to hear. One thing that really stuck in my mind is the difference that even though you're in mediation, even if the attorneys are involved, they're still thinking about court. And if the attorneys are involved in the collaborative process, they can really let down their guard. They can relax, because nothing's going to be used in a litigation context. If it would be used, the attorneys are not going to represent these people in a court case, where in the mediation, they can still represent them in the court case. They can say, hey, judge, what they said in mediation. And even though everyone's like, oh, that's settlement, we're not really hearing about it, it still gets into the judge's subconscious. Trust me, it does. All right. So what makes a good collaborative divorce attorney? If people listening to this and they want to, hire a collaborative divorce attorney, but they just like looking for, maybe they go on Google and just see attorneys. Do they have to have someone that says collaborative divorce attorney? Do they have to have someone that says, kid-friendly divorce attorney? What should they be looking for?
Yeah, great question. So they definitely want to look for someone who identifies as a collaborative professional, because if you do collaborative divorce, if it's part of your toolbox for helping families, you're definitely going to be letting people know that. So that's kind of the first step. I would suggest that you would like to find someone who has some experience doing collaborative practice. So if someone says, yeah, I read about it, an attorney says, I read about it, it sounds like a good idea, I'd be willing to try it, it doesn't mean they can't do a good job. I've worked with some attorneys who, for them, it was their first collaborative case and they did a fine job. But if you really want to be safe, pick somebody who's got some collaborative work under their belts, because they know the ropes. So that would be a consideration. But I would say that honestly, the most important consideration is, does this attorney understand how the collaborative process works, and are they committed to the collaborative process? Because I think underlying your question is this concern that many folks have. I have this concern that people Google collaborative divorce attorney, they find someone, that attorney says, oh yeah, I do collaborative divorce, but the attorney doesn't have their heart in it. They're really a litigator who is just looking for more business. And I get it. Look, everybody wants to get business, but the collaborative process in my mind is a somewhat sacred process. It's a process that's really dedicated to those folks who want to find a peaceful, out-of-court resolution where one person doesn't harm the other person, but both people come out whole, or as whole as they can at the end of a divorce. So I would say to people, find an attorney who says they're collaborative, make sure they have collaborative experience, and then interview that attorney and ask them some questions like, how committed are you to this process? Or what is it that you feel is so beneficial about a collaborative process? Or, what do you think is the most important thing for my children in this process? And you'll start to hear things that tell you, does this person really get it? Are they really there to support me through this process? Or are they really just trying to sell me a bill of goods?
Totally. I love that because there's so many wolves in sheep's clothing. These attorneys, talk, they say they're collaborative, they say they're mediation friendly, but they're not. And I love that point. And, I've experienced it personally in my practice. All right. Since I have you here, Dr. Gaies, I want to talk specifics. We got some general. So let's think about a way that you would deal with this in a more collaborative view, which is the idea of separation versus divorce. And I thought, that's something that comes up. And I just want to see how you would maybe think about that in a more collaborative way versus maybe a more traditional way.
Okay, terrific. So I want to be mindful of the fact that the term separation or trial separation can mean different things in different places. So some jurisdictions actually have laws related to separation of spouses, and then some jurisdictions don't. So you certainly want to speak to your attorney as to the timing of separation and moving out of a house, for example, into an apartment, to make sure that in your state or your jurisdiction that you're not doing something that's contrary to your legal interest. But I can speak to it certainly from an emotional perspective and a logistical perspective and a parenting perspective. So if a couple is not sure if they want to get divorced and they feel like they need some time separate from each other, there are different ways to do it. Some spouses will do it in the same home. So if you have a home that is either large enough or set up in a certain way, or your work schedules are such that you can do what we call nesting, which is where you are each there for the children during certain blocks of time. And then during the other blocks of time, you're off duty and the other parent is on duty. And maybe the spouses are staying in two different rooms in the house, two different bedrooms. That actually can function for some families so that the kids still have both parents there, but the parents are starting to get a feel for what it's like being a parent on their own during their parenting time, and also not really interacting as frequently directly with their partner. However, that is not for every couple because some people really need the distance and they need to live in two separate homes. So a trial separation in that case is something that's worth considering if there's any possibility of coming back together. So sometimes spouses say, look, we're going to go see a couples counselor. We're going to work on our marriage, but it's just we're in so much conflict living in the same house together. We need a little space from each other. So one spouse might say, let me rent an Airbnb for a few months and we'll still co-parent together. And we'll go see this counselor and let's see if we can pull things back together. And that would be, in my mind, a good reason to do a trial separation. If you know right up front, look, this is not really a separation. We're just getting divorced. So one spouse says, oh, I want to stay married. And the other spouse really doesn't want to be married anymore and is really just going through the motions with the couples counseling. In that case, the separation is really just a stepping stone to the divorce. And I think in those cases, it's better to be honest about it and come up with a plan that makes sense kind of for the longer term.
Yeah, I love that nuanced approach. And you can see how thoughtful, how detailed, just thinking about this off the top of his head. That, I think, is what you're going to get in collaborative divorce and with also good professionals. You gave me a quote from a training, which I want to close our conversation with. It was that Billy Collins quote, which is, once 2 spoons in bed, now tying forks across a granite table and the knives they have hired. What does that quote mean to you in the context of divorce?
Yeah, so that is actually a short poem by Billy Collins, who was a poet laureate of the United States in the early 2000s. And what I find so powerful about that short poem, very few words, right? But it really encapsulates the experience of a litigated divorce for so many spouses, right? They feel like they're not in control. They feel like it's a very cold process. They feel like the attorneys they hired are really warriors who are just going to destroy the other spouse and that spouse's attorney. And that is not how every litigated divorce goes, but that is how a lot of litigated divorces go. It's kind of like the War of the Roses, that old movie from many years ago. Collaborative divorce is the antidote to that. It's the antidote to that poem that Billy Collins wrote. Collaborative divorce is a process. We take it out of the court, out of the sterility of the court. We meet either in an office, or actually I do all my collaborative work by Zoom. So you can do it from the comfort of your home. We do it in a way that is customized to that family. It is not cookie cutter. I meet for an hour with each spouse at the beginning. I find out who they are, what's happened in the marriage, why they're getting divorced, what they want to accomplish, and many, many other things. We establish a relationship. Then the whole team gathers around that, and we walk this path with the spouses. So we're with them side by side. We're available to take phone calls, to respond to emails on a daily basis, to answer questions, and to help them come up with their resolution that allows them to move forward in their lives and allows them to protect their children and preserve the relationships with their children for the long haul.
I love that. I love that. As you can see, Dr. Gaies knows what he talks about. He's a real professional. Please check out his books on Amazon. I also think your collaborative book is on Audible. Is that right?
Yes, both books are. And if you if you like the way my voice sounds, then you can actually listen to me, because I narrate the book on collaborative, and my good friend Jim Morris and I narrated the book on mindful co-parenting.
Great. Well, listen, thank you for coming on here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and doing this work and making people are hopeful that divorce doesn't have to be a battlefield, even when you're dealing with difficult people and even when you might be panicky and stressed. So thank you so much. I'm Corey Shapiro, helping you stay creative, not reactive in your divorce.